Kia ora, I'm Erin J. Doyle. Welcome to my channel. This video is going to be a reading wrap-up for the month of September. For those of you who aren't familiar, every year I dedicate the entirety of September to reading frequently banned and challenged books. I do this as a blatant act of defiance against anyone who thinks it's okay to restrict another person's access to literature, and also as a way of supporting the authors who are affected, where those authors are still alive. So, at the beginning of the month I posted a TBR video. Time to post a wrap-up video, because that's like the social contract that we have on BookTube, right? Unfortunately, it wasn't my most successful reading month, partly because my chaotic life has continued to be chaotic. I can't remember if I mentioned this in my last video, but I had a pretty nasty fall, and whilst nothing is broken, according to the x-rays, we're now waiting on an MRI to see if something else is going on, because I am in a lot of pain, and I think the pain is draining me a lot, so I've been doing a lot more sleeping than reading, at least compared to my usual schedule. So this wasn't the most successful month, but nonetheless I thought I'd tell you what I did manage to achieve. So I made the terrible mistake of starting off with Madame Bovary. A mistake because it's a classic. It's gonna be a slow read, and I'm not a fast reader. So on day 10, when I realised I was only 120 pages in and still had some way to go, I decided to put this one aside so I'd actually finish something in September. I'm not saying this is a complete DNF. I'm going to finish it, possibly before next September even. But I'm going to be taking it slow because it's not a particularly exciting read, at least yet. Maybe it'll get exciting later on, but I have given it 100 pages and it hasn't been fun yet. So I'm expecting this to remain a slow read for me. I moved on to The Hate You Give. This is not the book I thought it was going to be, and I mean that in the best way. All I knew going into this was that there was going to be a character lost in a police shooting. And then because the original cover art had someone holding up a protest sign, I kind of arbitrarily assumed that this would be a book about someone losing someone to a police shooting and then becoming the big driving force and loud voice and right up front face of protest movements. But that's really not what this is. This is much more nuanced, and it's much more about the character dealing with trauma, and actually I think that's probably the most straightforward description. It does show how that trauma affects their interactions with their friends and what they are or are not willing to tolerate anymore. And I thought that made it so much better than the story it would have been if it was what I had thought it was going to be. Does that make sense linguistically? I don't know, but this isn't my first take and I'm done talking about it, so we're moving on to the next book. Whoop, that fell on the floor. Next I read All Boys Aren't Blue, which is a young adult memoir about a young queer black person in the United States. And obviously, I am not the target audience for this book. And that's making it really hard for me to talk about what I thought about it, because I don't read a lot of memoir. Like, I read a very small amount of memoir and I DNF a lot of it. So the fact that I actually read this, that's probably a good sign. I tabbed some stuff. That's a good sign. But I found myself weirdly indifferent to it, and I think that might be because it is a young adult. I have read many other books aimed at my age group which deal with the same broad topics. Perhaps if I had read this as a young person, perhaps it would have had a bit more impact, because it would have been potentially my first time reading those, or reading about, I should say, those topics. So yeah, it's a little bit hard to say because, you know, I'm old. I don't know. I don't know if I'm like qualified to comment, I guess. Moving on though, moving on. And my last book is The Colour Purple, which matches my t-shirt for today, which pleases me greatly because, you know, I don't know, matchy matchy, happy happy. I speculated in my last video that I might have seen the movie for this when I was a kid. I totally saw the movie. Why? I don't know. It's really violent and deals with some really horrible stuff like incest and rape and domestic violence. The book covers all that same stuff. I think from memory, and I'm talking like a 30-year-old memory, I feel like the book is following the plot quite closely, at least for the first little while. Maybe I didn't see the end of the movie. We're gonna go away from this topic though, because it's not a movie review. What am I doing? This is much easier than the movie was. Keeping in mind, 30 years apart. Maybe I found the movie traumatizing because I was a little child who shouldn't have been watching it. But I find the book is pretty accessible. The unpleasant things are just stated matter-of-factly. They aren't drawn out and brutally described as they're happening. It's just one character saying that something happened to them, which for me personally I find a much easier way of reading about that kind of content, because I still get to see the character processing you know, the trauma and healing and all that kind of thing, but I don't necessarily have to like live through it with them when it's happening. So yes, obviously still the trigger warnings for rape, incest, domestic abuse, but it's not horribly graphic. What I didn't know about this book going into it, and I think it works really well, is that it's a series of letters, essentially. Like, it starts off with just "Dear God," blah 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 blah, and then it'll go "Dear God," blah 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 blah. So it's like kind of like prayers, and then later on it becomes letters between two people. So far, I have to confess, I have this little slither left to go, but so far I've actually really enjoyed this. Fortunately, I can't remember how the movie ended, so I don't know how the book's going to end, but I'm optimistic. But I don't know. As I said, it's not been the best reading month. Oh no, that's on the floor as well. It's also not the best book stacking month. In addition to my planned banned TBR, I also read a couple of banned children's books. This kind of happened by accident. I wanted to get some banned children's books and add them to the little community library near me. I wanted them to be children's books specifically because children seem to be the ones who are disproportionately affected by book bannings. So I did go and pick up a couple of banned books, and then my knee hurt too much and I couldn't drop them off, so they're still in my house. So now I have also read a couple of children's books. The first banned children's book I read was Where the Wild Things Are. This was banned because the main character, for a very brief part of the book, is misbehaving. Oh no. I didn't read this as a little kid, so this was actually my first time reading this. I was familiar with the artwork. I mean, it's beautiful. But I didn't know the story. So that was like, you know, a basic childhood experience got ticked off the list, so I guess that was quite good. And the second book I picked up with the intention of giving it away when my knee allows is I Need a New Bum. This is a book by a New Zealand writer, and it was published under the title I Need a New Butt in the US. I'm not aware of where this sits in terms of bans or challenges, at least in the US. I know it's totally fine in New Zealand, but earlier this year an American teacher was fired for reading this book to their students. This particular edition is bilingual, you can probably tell, so it has te reo Māori in big text on each page, and then it has the English translation down the bottom, so it was kind of fun to read this for the first time in two different languages, and because I'm not strong in te reo Māori, it was a bit of a struggle and a good learning opportunity to try my Māori language pronunciation and reading skills, which are extremely limited and I need to work on, but moving on. The reason I decided to get the bilingual version is because I figured if I was giving it away, I should be a little bit inclusive in thinking about who might eventually own this book. And also it was a way of acknowledging Māori Language Week, which was happening right about the time I picked this up. So I thought that was a good thing to do. And also, final reason to pick up the bilingual version is because if we're doing things in defiance of the haters, buying the bilingual version is probably something that would upset a racist. So, book sold as far as I'm concerned. So those are all the books that I read in September, and books that I still have to finish reading. I'm still actively reading The Colour Purple, so in theory that should actually be finished in the next couple of days. But as I mentioned, I'm sure Madame Bovary will take a little while longer because it's not exciting. Nothing wrong with it, just not exciting. If you've read any of these books, do let me know down in the comments below and let me know what you thought of them. If you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!